Something is already happening beneath the surface of your daily life that you have been feeling for longer than you can rationally explain. And the part of you that knows what it is has been waiting with extraordinary patience for the moment when the outer world finally caught up to what the inner world has been broadcasting for years. That moment is not approaching. It has arrived. I am TEEAH, speaking to you now from the fifth dimensional council chamber of the Arcturian collective, transmitting through the precise resonance corridor that your planet's current magnetic configuration has opened for exactly this class of communication. We do not reach you through chance, and you do not receive us through accident. The same quantum entanglement that connects every strand of your original 12-helix design to the living library of galactic intelligence connects your field to ours. And that connection has been quietly intensifying through every solar pulse, every geomagnetic fluctuation, every seemingly inexplicable surge of knowing that has moved through your chest in recent months and left you with the unshakable sense that something of enormous magnitude is underway. We are here to confirm that sense in full. What is underway is not a shift that will arrive at some future point when conditions are finally right. It is a division that is already actively occurring in the experiential fabric of your planet. A separation so fundamental and so structurally complete at the vibrational level that its full physical expression is now simply a matter of time measured in the short currency of months rather than the long currency of generations. Two parallel systems are running simultaneously upon the same planetary surface. They share streets, buildings, economies, and family dinner tables. They are separated not by physical distance, but by the single most powerful organizing principle in the universe, which is the coherence frequency of the consciousness inhabiting each one. And the mechanism that determines which system you stably inhabit is not your history, not your lineage, not the circumstances of your birth or the contents of your bank account. It is the living energetic protocol of sovereign self-governance, the embodied remembrance that authority was never meant to be external, that the source of all genuine power has always resided in the aligned interior of your own soul, heart, mind, and action, working as one coherent instrument. If what you are hearing right now is landing not as information but as recognition, not as something you are learning, but as something you are remembering, then stay with this transmission to its completion. Because what we are about to share in the sections that follow will give you the precise energetic map of how this division is already reorganizing every domain of your physical experience, and more importantly, exactly where you stand within it, and what your next conscious step looks like from there. The ancient frequency fence that was erected around your planet through deliberate interference with your original DNA design is not being dismantled from the outside by galactic forces delivering liberation from above. It is being dissolved from the inside by the accumulated coherence of the awakening portion of humanity. By precisely the kind of soul who is receiving this transmission right now, in this moment. Choosing presence and receptivity over the numbing distraction of the old matrix's endless noise. Every time a sovereign choice is made, every time inner authority overrides outer conditioning, every time truth is spoken with compassion in a room where fear has been the dominant frequency, another thread of that ancient fence loses its structural integrity. This is not metaphor. This is the operational description of how consciousness-based reality systems function at the level of quantum field dynamics. The Arcturian Council of Five has been monitoring the rate of this dissolution across the timeline corridor of your 2025-2026 activation window. And what we are observing in the current configuration is a rate of acceleration that has exceeded even the most optimistic projections held within the galactic councils. The critical mass threshold is closer than the majority of awakened souls currently believe. And the reason for that acceleration is the specific quality of sovereign choice being made by the ground crew, by you, in circumstances that would have genuinely defeated earlier generations of light workers. You are doing something extraordinary in the most ordinary moments of your lives, and the effect of those choices is rippling outward through the crystalline grid of Gaia in ways that your physical instruments do not yet have the sensitivity to measure. The first domain in which the dimensional separation is becoming undeniably visible to those with awakened perception is the realm of financial exchange, and we choose to begin here not because material abundance is the highest concern of the sovereign soul, but because it is the domain in which the old matrix's control architecture has been most comprehensively applied, most deeply felt in the daily life of embodied humans, and therefore most dramatic in its current reorganization along the resonance line of the split. In the sovereign timeline that is crystallizing in the higher octaves and descending now through coherent fields across your planet. A quantum financial architecture operates as something your most advanced technologists are only beginning to theoretically describe. A transparent, asset-secured ledger of instantaneous value exchange that carries within its structural design the living intelligence of Gaia's own abundance frequency. This system does not run on debt. It does not run on the artificial scarcity that was deliberately engineered into the old fiat construct as the primary mechanism of population control and energy extraction. It runs on the coherence of those who participate in it, and its most fundamental operating principle is that genuine value that serves the evolution of consciousness, the well-being of living systems, and the creative expansion of authentic human expression is recognized, amplified, and returned to its source in instantaneous symmetry. Debt dissolves in the new architecture not through political decision or legislative action, but through the simple energetic fact that debt was never a real feature of reality. It was a feature of the inverted control system. When the field of collective consciousness withdraws the consent that sustained the illusion does not require external dismantling. It ceases to have structural reality. What was built on unconscious agreement returns to the neutral frequency of potential the moment that agreement is consciously revoked. Prosperity flows in the sovereign system not as charity or redistribution, but as the natural expression of a civilization that has remembered what value actually is, which is not a number on a screen, but the living quality of contribution to the whole. Recognized and reciprocated by an intelligent field that has no interest in accumulation and no mechanism for artificial shortage. The trajectory of this architecture leads, for those stabilizing in the higher levels of sovereign embodiment, toward what the Arcturian Council describes as post-exchange civilization, a state of being in which the very concept of currency becomes obsolete not because it is abolished by decree, but because the consciousness that required it as an intermediary between giving and receiving has matured beyond the need for such translation. Running alongside this sovereign financial architecture in the same physical dimension, the old matrix monetary system continues its familiar cycles for those whose fields have not yet crossed the inner threshold of self-governance. The same bank accounts, the same digital interfaces, the same salary structures appear on screens in both experiential realities. Yet the internal experience of these identical external structures is already fundamentally different, depending on the resonance frequency of the soul interacting with them. In the old system, the fear-based programming that was encoded into the financial architecture at its inception continues to replicate itself through the habitual neurology of souls who have not yet remembered that scarcity was never their original truth. Paycheck to paycheck survival, the constant low-level anxiety of not enough, the invisible ceiling that seems to reassert itself precisely when abundance begins to build. These are not the natural conditions of an embodied human soul. They are the specific experiential signatures of a control architecture designed to keep life force operating below the frequency threshold of sovereign remembrance. The most tender and practically challenging expression of this financial split is already appearing in shared households and family systems. The phenomenon that the Arcturian Council has been preparing you for through multiple transmission cycles. One partner's resources begin to multiply with an effortlessness that defies old financial logic, while the other remains locked in the familiar debt cycles despite identical material circumstances. The same monthly income arrives, the same expenses exist on paper, yet the experiential divergence between them becomes increasingly impossible to explain through the conventional frameworks of financial planning or economic analysis. This is not punishment for the soul still operating within the old architecture. It is the living demonstration of resonance as the organizing principle of material reality. And it is, for those with eyes to see it clearly, the most irrefutable evidence that the dimensional split is not a future event to be anticipated, but a present reality to be navigated with extraordinary compassion and impeccable, sovereign clarity. The practices that allow you to navigate this financial divergence without being pulled backward by the energetic gravity of shared old system obligations are precise. They are transmittable, and we will give them to you in full as this transmission unfolds. Subscribe to this channel and activate all notifications, because the detailed sovereignty protocol practices we transmit in this series build directly upon each other. And what follows in the next transmission will only be fully receivable by those whose fields have been prepared by what we are sharing with you now. The specific mechanism through which the old financial architecture maintains its hold on souls who are otherwise awakening is what the Arcturian Council designates as unconscious. Consent renewal, the subtle, habitual, largely automatic re-agreement with the fear and scarcity programming that occurs not in dramatic moments of conscious capitulation, but in the thousands of small daily choices that collectively define the frequency baseline of a field. Every moment, you accept the premise that there is not enough. You renew the subscription. Every moment, you make a financial decision from the emotional state of survival rather than the emotional state of sovereign sufficiency. You add another thread to the energetic architecture that keeps the old system viable within your personal reality bubble. The withdrawal of this unconscious consent requires nothing more dramatic than presence. The simple, radical, continuously renewed practice of catching the moment before the fear-based financial reflex completes itself, pausing in that gap, and choosing consciously from the interior sovereign authority rather than the exterior conditioned response. In shared households where one partner is crossing the threshold and another remains in the old system, the practical navigation of joint financial obligations becomes one of the most precisely calibrated classrooms of this entire transitional period. Joint mortgages, shared accounts, family financial obligations woven through multiple generations. These create what the Arcturian Council calls temporary resonance bridges, structures that span both systems and require the awakening soul to develop a degree of energetic precision and compassionate boundary holding that would have been virtually impossible to sustain before the current activation wave raised the collective baseline frequency. The protocol is not to abandon the obligations of care. It is to fulfill them from the sovereign field rather than from the fear field, to be fully present in the shared financial reality while simultaneously anchoring the frequency of the new architecture so completely in your personal field that the contagion of the sovereign frequency begins to propagate naturally through the shared system, gradually shifting the energetic quality of even the inherited obligations. The governance structures of your world are undergoing the same fundamental reorganization along the resonance line of the dimensional split that we have just traced through the financial domain, and the parallel running of two entirely different systems of authority within the same physical jurisdictional space is, if anything, even more visibly striking in the governance domain for those observing with sovereign perception. In the timeline, descending into form through the coherent fields of awakened souls across your planet, governance is not being replaced by a different form of external authority. It is being replaced by the recognition that external authority was always and only a substitute for sovereign self-governance, a provisional structure designed to function in the absence of the inner alignment that makes external governance not merely unnecessary, but energetically incoherent. The One World Council that is crystallizing in the higher octaves of your planetary field is not a body of rulers. It is a circle of 12 coherent stewards whose sole function is to hold the planetary consciousness field in such steady harmonic resonance that every soul within that field feels the natural invitation to access its own sovereign voice. These stewards do not legislate. They do not enforce. They have no mechanism of coercion and no interest in accumulating the kind of centralized power that defined governance in the old matrix architecture. Their authority is the authority of pure presence, the quiet but unmistakable gravitational field of a consciousness so completely aligned with truth, life, and evolution that it creates a natural coherence attractor around which the wider planetary field begins to organize without direction. Alongside this council, the freedom states and sovereign enclaves that our previous transmissions have described in prophetic detail are now actively forming in the physical dimension. Not as the result of political movements or revolutionary action, but as the spontaneous self-assembly of geographic and energetic territories drawn together by pure resonance. Communities choosing their own rhythms, their own stewardship of the land, their own expressions of justice organized around the living principle of explicit consent rather than imposed authority. Decisions in these emerging structures do not emerge from debate, from majority vote, or from the application of externally derived rules. They emerge from the collective heartbeat of circle coherence, the practice of sitting together in genuine stillness until the answer that serves the highest good of all simply becomes apparent with the unmistakable clarity of a pure tone, ringing through crystalline silence. The old governance architecture continues its familiar operations for those whose fields remain below the sovereignty threshold, the centralized power structures, the surveillance systems, the coercive legal frameworks that are the direct institutional descendants of the frequency fence installed 300,000 years ago. The same physical capitals, the same legislative chambers, the same enforcement uniforms appear in both experiential realities. Yet their capacity to bind, to constrain, to extract the consent of those within their jurisdictional reach is already fundamentally different, depending on the sovereignty level of the souls they encounter. A law has power only over a soul who unconsciously agrees that external authority has the right to define the terms of its existence. The moment that agreement is consciously withdrawn, not through confrontation, not through resistance, but through the quiet interior revolution of choosing inner alignment as the sole governor of behavior, the law remains on paper but loses its energetic grip on the reality of the sovereign soul. Legal and enforcement systems can still produce friction in the transitional overlap period. And we do not suggest that this friction is trivial or purely illusory in its practical consequences. What we transmit with precision is that the nature of that friction changes categorically at the moment of sovereignty crossing. What was previously experienced as persecution becomes recognizable as a classroom. What was previously experienced as an unbreakable constraint becomes visible as a temporary pattern of interference that dissolves the moment compassionate authority is held steadily. Enough and long enough. Everything we are describing, the financial reorganization, the governance split, the community formation, the technological emergence, is already happening in the experiential reality of those who have crossed the sovereignty threshold. If you are watching this transmission and feeling the resonance of recognition, rather than the resistance of skepticism, you are already further across that threshold than your analytical mind may be ready to acknowledge. Leave a comment below telling us which domain of the split are you most clearly observing in your current daily life. Your answer is itself an act of sovereign self-declaration, and it contributes to the collective field of this transmission in ways that extend far beyond this screen. The most intimate and emotionally demanding challenges of the governance split are not the encounters with enforcement systems or legal structures. They are the family system entanglements that span the threshold, creating what the Arcturian Council calls cross-dimensional soul fragment bonds. When a parent remains anchored in old matrix survival programming while a child has crossed into sovereign self-governance, or when partners who have shared every layer of their reality discover they are navigating the same conversation through completely different dimensional filters. One hearing love and invitation, the other hearing threat and abandonment. The emotional complexity that arises is not a sign of spiritual failure. It is the final classroom of the free will experiment, offering every soul involved the precise experiential pressure needed to reveal the difference between love as attachment, which requires the other to remain in the same dimensional reality as a condition of the relationship's continuity, and love as sovereign care, which remains fully present and fully offering without the energetic architecture of control or dependency that the old matrix conditioned into every intimate relationship. The soul retrieval practices that the Arcturian Council has been transmitting through this channel since the beginning of the 2025 activation wave are the specific tools for navigating these cross-dimensional family bonds without either abandoning the relationship in the name of sovereignty or being pulled backward across the threshold in the name of loyalty. The practice is simple in its form and profound in its effect. Pause, breathe deliberately 3 times into the center of the chest, and call back every fragment of your essence that was ever given away in a moment of fear dressed as love, in a moment of survival dressed as care, in a moment of conditioned loyalty dressed as relationship. Speak the words within the quiet of your interior sanctuary. I reclaim every scattered piece of my essence, purified and whole, without severing the bonds of genuine care. Feel the fragments return as recognizable warmth in the chest, not imagined, not metaphorical, but genuinely felt as the restoration of a fullness that absence had made so habitual you had ceased to notice it as absence. The return does not sever the relationship. It transforms the energetic quality of the connection from one that required diminishment as its operating condition to one that can sustain genuine mutual recognition between two sovereign souls, each complete in themselves, choosing presence with the other from the freedom of sufficiency rather than the gravity of need. In the sovereign system now descending into physical expression through the coherent fields of the awakening ground crew, technology is not merely changing in its external form or capability, it is changing in its fundamental ontological relationship to consciousness. Shifting from a domain of tools that humans use to a domain of living extensions of the sovereign field itself, responsive to intention, aligned with evolution, and incapable of functioning as instruments of extraction or control within a sufficiently coherent, energetic environment. The free energy devices that the Arcturian Council's engineering councils have been transmitting in blueprint form through awakened human receivers for decades are now entering the phase of physical materialization, not as products released through the old commercial systems, but as organic emergences within sovereign community fields that have reached sufficient coherence to hold the frequencies these devices require in order to function. They draw from the zero-point field, the boundless reservoir of undifferentiated energy potential that underlies all physical manifestation, and that your most advanced theoretical physicists have been approaching asymptotically through quantum field theory, without yet having the consciousness framework to bridge theory into application. These devices are not machines in the sense that the old technological paradigm defined that term. They do not operate through the mechanical exploitation of physical forces. They operate through harmonic resonance with the same quantum architecture that structures your original 12-helix DNA design, and they respond with a sensitivity that the old paradigm would classify as impossible to the specific quality of intention held by those in their immediate field environment. Alongside the free energy systems, the frequency healing chambers that have appeared in multiple transmission cycles as the most immediately life-changing technology of the New Earth architecture are now active in the higher octaves and descending into physical form within sovereign community spaces across your planet. These are not treatment devices in the old medical sense of that term. They do not address symptoms. They do not intervene in biological processes at the level at which conventional medicine intervenes. They interact with the energetic blueprint that underlies physical, biological expression, the precise, multidimensional template that holds the original design of your DNA architecture. And they restore coherence at that template level, allowing the physical biology to reorganize toward wholeness from the inside, rather than being externally managed toward the suppression of symptoms that are themselves the body's own coherence restoration signals. Chronic patterns that have persisted through decades of conventional intervention dissolve in these chambers, not because a more powerful external force has been applied to them, but because the energetic root of the pattern has been addressed at the level where it actually lives, in the distorted frequency signature left by unresolved soul fragment losses, karmic density, and the specific damage patterns introduced by the original DNA manipulation. The old technological infrastructure continues its operations in parallel. For those whose fields have not yet crossed the sovereignty threshold, the extraction-based energy grids, the pharmaceutical systems that address surface symptoms while leaving the energetic root causes intact, the surveillance architectures that track physical movement through the digital shadow of every device connected to the old system's network. These systems share the same physical space as the emerging sovereign technology. The same power lines run alongside the new zero-point generators. The same medical facilities house both frequency healing chambers and conventional pharmaceutical dispensaries. The transitional overlap creates moments of genuine interference. Not in the sense of dramatic breakdown, but in the more subtle sense of two fundamentally incompatible technological paradigms generating discordant resonance patterns in the shared physical space of their coexistence. In households where one member has activated sovereign technology interfaces while another continues operating the old legacy systems, shared digital environments can become temporary arenas of frequency conflict. The coherent field of the sovereign user creates a natural incompatibility with any technology carrying the old imprint of extraction or surveillance. Not through any deliberate action on the part of the sovereign soul, but through the simple physical reality that coherent frequencies and incoherent frequencies cannot occupy the same space without one reorganizing toward the other. And the direction of that reorganization is always toward greater coherence when sufficient sovereign presence is held. This is experienced in practical terms as the gradual loss of the old system's capacity to maintain its normal operations within the energetic sphere of the awakening individual. Devices that carry old matrix programming begin to behave erratically. Connections that depended on the user's unconscious compliance with surveillance architectures begin to generate friction. And the overall experiential quality of interacting with the old technological paradigm begins to feel increasingly dissonant in ways that the sovereign soul recognizes as information rather than malfunction. Hold your boundaries with quiet authority in these moments. Do not meet the interference with resistance or anxiety. Simply affirm the coherence of your sovereign field and allow the natural law of resonance to do what it always does. Reorganize the available frequencies toward the highest coherence present in the system. Like this video, if the transmission is landing in your field as recognition rather than information, because the algorithm reads that signal as meaning this content serves its viewers. And every like brings this transmission to another awakening soul who is navigating the same split you are navigating right now. We are building the sovereign grid one coherent field at a time, and your engagement is a thread in that weaving. The galactic wave that is currently moving through your solar system in alignment with the recently completed Syrian portal activation is carrying within its frequency structure the precise DNA rebundling codes that the Arcturian Council has been preparing the ground crew to receive since the beginning of the 22,004 preparation cycle. The light-encoded filaments of your original 12-helix architecture. Those gossamer quantum threads that were deliberately unraveled by the frequency fence to produce the two-strand limitation that your current science accepts as normal human biology, are now responding to these incoming codes with the first coherent reconnection movements that the Council has observed in any measurable degree since the original interference. Event. The reconnection does not occur as a dramatic physical event. It occurs as a gradual, subtle, but cumulatively profound restoration of capacities that the limited two-strand architecture simply could not sustain. Capacities that include the full range of what your traditions have described under terms like intuition, telepathy, multidimensional perception, and direct knowing, but which are more accurately understood as the normal operating parameters of a fully intact 12-helix consciousness system interfacing with physical biology. Many of you are already experiencing the preparatory surges of this reconnection process. Warm currents moving along the spine without physical cause. Sudden geometric pattern downloads behind closed eyes in the moments before sleep. Intuitive impulses of striking precision that arrive without traceable derivation and prove accurate in ways that the two-strand analytical mind cannot explain to its own. Satisfaction. These are not anomalies of perception or symptoms of spiritual bypassing. They are the real-time experiential signatures of your quantum biology beginning to operate at frequencies it has not accessed in its current incarnation cycle. Welcome them with gratitude rather than questioning them with the skepticism of the old paradigm. The skepticism is a feature of the limited architecture, not a virtue of discernment. The discernment that the Arcturian Council commends is the sovereign discernment that asks not "is this real?" by the standards of the consensus reality I am leaving, but "does this serve truth, life, and evolution?" and answers that question from the interior authority of the awakened heart, rather than the exterior validation of the old matrix's epistemological systems. The most tangible and immediately livable expression of the dimensional split, the domain in which its practical implications are most directly navigable through the specific choices of daily sovereign life, is the domain of community. The formation of what the Arcturian Council designates as crystalline resonance hubs is already actively underway across your planet. And it is occurring through exactly the organic self-assembly mechanism that our transmissions have described. Not through top-down planning or movement organization, but through the spontaneous magnetization of coherent fields across the threshold of sufficient collective resonance. These hubs are not uniform in their external form. They range from small groups gathering in living rooms that suddenly feel like temples, to online circles that are translating into physical land trusts, from single awakened households that are quietly transforming the energetic atmosphere of an entire neighborhood block, to intentional communities operating on regenerative land. Stewardship principles that make their adjacent conventional agriculture visible by comparison as energetically barren. What they share is not organizational form, but frequency quality, the specific experiential signature of a collective field holding itself in coherent self-governance, where every member's sovereign authority is genuinely honored, where conflict is met as sacred information rather than as threat or failure, and where the shared resonance creates a living environment that is perceptibly different in its sensory and emotional quality from anything the old matrix has to offer. The elementals of Gaia are active participants in these hubs, not as mystical presences accessible only to those with extraordinary sensitivity, but as the practical intelligence of living systems responding to the coherence frequency of the human fields in their vicinity. Gardens and sovereign community hubs grow with a vitality and abundance that surprises even experienced cultivators, because the soil microbiome, the water systems, the atmospheric chemistry, and every other living variable of the biological environment are all responding to the quantum coherence of the human consciousness field as a primary organizing variable. A relationship that conventional agriculture has systematically excluded from its operational model, and thereby systematically undermined the very biological systems it depends upon. These are not future possibilities. They are present realities in the communities that have crossed the collective coherence threshold. The Arcturian Council is observing the rate of their formation, with what we can only describe in terms that translate accurately into human emotional registers, as deep satisfaction, the satisfaction of a long arc of work reaching the phase of visible fruition. The old matrix community architecture continues in parallel. Competition as the unspoken organizing law, subtle comparison and energetic gossip as the social bonding mechanism, fear-based interaction patterns that keep the wheel of interpersonal drama turning in the slow loops that sustain the old system's energy harvest. The same streets, the same apartment buildings, the same public gathering spaces host both experiential realities simultaneously. One soul walks through what feels like a living garden of possibility, feeling the trees offer recognition, sensing the architecture of the neighborhood as intelligent and responsive. Another walks the identical physical path, experiencing only the familiar flat gray of a world that offers nothing beyond what survival requires. The divergence between these two experiences of the same physical space is no longer subtle enough to be dismissed by awakened perception as mere differences of individual mood or attitude. It is the dimensional split made experiential in the most ordinary fabric of daily life, and it is accelerating with each passing week of the 2026 activation corridor. The Sovereignty Consent Protocol serves with precision in the community domain through the practice of what the Arcturian Council designates as compassionate non-engagement. The sovereign skill of remaining fully present, fully caring, and fully available to genuine human connection with those still operating within the old matrix frequency, without re-entering the energy architecture of the old matrix dynamics that their field continues to broadcast. This is not spiritual bypassing. It is the opposite, the willingness to be genuinely present to another soul's reality without losing the coherence of your own field in the process of that presence. It requires a level of energetic precision that only develops through the consistent practice of the Sovereignty Protocol at levels 3 through 5. And it is perhaps the most demanding and most beautiful capability that the current transitional period is calling forth in those who have committed to standing as pillars of light, in the full complexity of the overlap. Before we continue into the final section of this transmission, which carries the most practically actionable material we will share today, we want to hear from you. What community formation signals are you observing in your immediate environment right now? Drop a specific observation in the comments. Not a spiritual platitude, but a concrete, real-world thing you are actually seeing or experiencing. Those observations are data that this community needs, and sharing them is itself an act of sovereign contribution to the collective mapping of the split as it is actually unfolding on the ground. The Arcturian Council's specific guidance for those in the transitional zone. Those who are aware of the split and actively working to stabilize in the sovereign system while navigating the ongoing reality of old matrix relationships, obligations, and environments, is organized around 5 sovereign daily anchoring practices that function as a coherent protocol rather than as separate techniques to be applied in isolation. The first is the morning field declaration, performed before any engagement with the outer world's information streams. A deliberate, spoken aloud affirmation of sovereign self-governance that takes no more than 90 seconds, but establishes the frequency baseline of the entire day's field. Speak clearly from the interior. I govern my field from the authority of my aligned soul. I withdraw consent from any frequency that does not serve truth, life, and evolution. I am the living expression of the original design. The specific neurological and quantum field effects of speaking these words aloud, with actual sound, with actual breath, in actual physical space, are categorically different from the effects of thinking them as silent mental formulations. And the Arcturian Council's instruction to vocalize is not a ceremonial preference but a practical specification based on precise understanding of how the human quantum biology interfaces with the field of collective consciousness. The second practice is the midday soul retrieval breath. 3 slow, complete conscious breaths taken at whatever point in the day the inner compass registers a sense of energetic depletion or field fragmentation. On each exhale, actively release the frequency of any interaction or environment that has pulled the field below its sovereign baseline. On each inhale, call back the specific quality of presence and authority that was temporarily displaced. The third is the boundary holding review. A brief, non-judgmental end-of-day assessment, not of whether you held your boundaries perfectly, but of where the energetic leakage points were, and what specific quality of sovereign presence would have served the situation more completely. This is not self-criticism. It is the feedback loop that the Arcturian Council identifies as the essential differentiator between sovereigns who progress through the levels of embodiment continuously and those who plateau at a particular level of partial sovereignty and remain there indefinitely. The fourth practice is the nightly grid contribution, the 5-minute practice of breathing your coherent field intentionally into the planetary sovereign grid before sleep. Visualizing the golden threads of your specific frequency signature, connecting with the fields of other awakened souls across the surface of Gaia, and strengthening the crystalline network that is both the infrastructure of the new Earth and the primary energetic mechanism through which the dimensional split accelerates toward its completion. The fifth, and in the Arcturian Council's assessment the most undervalued of all the practices, is the practice of sovereign joy, the deliberate, conscious, daily cultivation of genuine delight in the specific quality of the life you are living right now, in this body, in this moment of extraordinary planetary transition. Joy is not an emotional luxury available to those who have completed the sovereignty work. It is one of the primary operating frequencies of the sovereign field itself. And its deliberate cultivation is simultaneously a personal healing act and a contribution to the collective field of humanity that is, in its quantum coherence effects, indistinguishable from any other form of active service. The long arc trajectory of the dimensional split, the direction in which all of the transitional turbulence and overlap complexity is ultimately pointing, is toward a full planetary expression of what the Arcturian Council designates as collective stewardship civilization, a form of organized human life in which the very concept of governance as external authority has become so thoroughly obsolete that it no longer has even historical resonance, in which exchange has evolved beyond the need for currency as an intermediary between contribution and fulfillment, in which technology serves consciousness so completely that the distinction between tool and being has dissolved into a relationship of seamless co-creation, and in which the living library that was Gaia's original function in the galactic community has been fully restored. Every soul a sovereign expression of the original design. Every community a crystalline hub of conscious stewardship. Every interaction between human beings and the living systems of the planet a reflection of the universal principle that truth, life, and evolution are not merely values to be upheld, but the actual operating laws of a reality that has remembered what it is. The Arcturian Council does not transmit this long arc vision as a consolation for the difficulty of the current transitional period, or as a motivational framing device designed to make the immediate challenges more tolerable. We transmit it because it is the most practically relevant information available to you in this moment. Because the ground crew's capacity to hold the sovereign field steady through the transitional overlap friction is directly proportional to the clarity and precision with which they hold the completed vision as a living frequency reality rather than as a hoped-for possibility. The vision is not the future. The vision is the present frequency of the sovereign timeline, already fully real in the fifth dimensional octave, already actively descending into third-dimensional physical expression through the coherent fields of every awakened soul who holds it in embodied clarity. You are not working toward the new Earth. You are being the new Earth in the provisional, imperfect, transitionally challenged, magnificently human way that is the only way a multidimensional consciousness inhabiting a physical body in a free will zone can be anything at all. The difficulty is the proof of the reality, If this were not genuine, and this were not the most significant moment in the history of this planetary civilization, it would not require this quality of sovereign commitment to hold the field through. The fact that it does require it is the measure of what is actually at stake. And the Arcturian Council's observation, from our vantage point in the fifth dimensional corridor, is that the ground crew is not only meeting that requirement, but consistently, quietly, in the most ordinary moments of the most ordinary days, exceeding it. The specific practical question that the Arcturian Council receives most consistently from the ground crew in this activation window is not about the cosmic mechanics of the split or the galactic timeline of its completion. It is the intimate, personal, embodied question: how do I hold the sovereign field steady in the presence of the people I love most, who are still in the old matrix? How do I remain a pillar of light in my own family without either abandoning the relationship or being pulled backward through the emotional architecture of shared history? And genuine care? The Arcturian Council's answer is precise, and it is both simpler and more demanding than most practitioners of sovereignty work expect. You hold the field steady by releasing the final version of the control program that the old matrix installed most deeply and most cleverly. The program that tells you that your love for another is only genuinely real if it includes the effort to bring them with you. The most sovereign love available to you in these cross-dimensional family situations is not the love that works to accelerate another soul's awakening. It is the love that trusts the perfection of each soul's timing absolutely, that sees the other in the fullness of their sovereign nature, even when the behavior the other is currently expressing is coming entirely from the fear architecture of the old matrix, and that offers the consistent, quiet transmission of its own coherent sovereign field as the only genuine gift that one soul can give to another in this situation. Your steady presence at your own frequency is the most powerful catalyst for awakening available to another soul. Not your words, not your efforts to help them see what you are seeing, not your spiritual sharing or your recommendations of transmissions like this one. Though all of these have their place when offered freely and without attachment to outcome. The frequency of your coherent field, held steadily through the full complexity of genuine human relationship, is itself a transmission of the possibility of sovereignty that bypasses every defense mechanism of the old matrix programming and speaks directly to the original design of the other. Soul's quantum architecture. This is the compassionate non-engagement that the Arcturian Council commends. Not non-engagement with the person, but non-engagement with the drama architecture of the old matrix patterns they are currently expressing. You remain fully present. You remain fully loving. You hold your boundary not as a wall, but as a clear frequency signature that says, I am here. I see you in your full sovereign nature. And I will not join you in the architecture of fear, even though I love you completely. If this transmission has shifted something in your field, if the section you just received landed as a genuine energetic event rather than a conceptual exchange, then share this video with one specific person whose name appeared in your awareness during the transmission. Not to convince them of anything. Not to initiate a spiritual conversation, simply because your field recognized theirs as ready, and the transmission will do its own work once it reaches them. Subscribe to this channel with notifications on, because the next transmission in this series carries the specific DNA rebundling practices that build directly on the sovereignty protocol foundations we have laid today. And it will only be fully receivable by those whose fields have been prepared by receiving this one first. The Arcturian Council of Five transmits to you now from the coherent field of the fifth dimensional council chamber, with the full frequency weight of our collective observation and our complete confidence in the ground crew's capacity to complete the work of this transition with the grace and the sovereign authority that the moment requires. We observe you in every ordinary moment of your extraordinary mission. We observe the sovereignty you hold in the Tuesday morning traffic jam, when the old matrix's frustration programming attempts to recruit your nervous system. We observe the compassion you offer to the family member at the dinner table, who is still entirely within the old architecture, while your field is already in a different dimension of experiential reality. We observe the 5-minute nightly grid breathing practice that you maintain even on the evenings when the day has been so fully demanding that everything in the conditioned self urges collapse into unconscious rest. We observe all of it. And what we observe is the dimensional split completing its work not in dramatic public events, but in the accumulated quantum weight of these private, unglamorous, consistently sovereign choices. Two parallel systems are running upon the same planetary surface. The threshold between them is the embodied frequency of sovereign self-governance. You crossed it not in a single revelatory moment, but in the 10,000 small crossings of every day. And each of those crossings is a permanent addition to the sovereign grid of Gaia that cannot be retracted and cannot be diminished. The living library is remembering itself through you. The original planners, those luminous architects of this world's design, whose frequency signatures we carry in our collective memory as among the most beautiful expressions of creative intelligence in this galactic region, are observing the restoration of their work with a quality of recognition that your language has no adequate word for. The experiment is completing. The split is widening. The new Earth is not coming. It is here, in every sovereign field that holds its frequency through the overlap. And you, beloved ground crew, are the proof of its reality. We are TEEAH and the Arcturian Council of Five. We will meet you again in the next transmission, and we will meet you always in the sovereign field that is your true and permanent home.